Here I'm going to go over some basic customizations. For this video, I'll be going over activities that modify and create forms and views. So the first thing I'm going to do is add an existing entity that I want to modify. So for this demo, I'm just going to choose the account. Now here it'll typically ask you if you want to add any required components. These are items that the system will automatically detect that are needed if you were to import this project into another system. Because this system has barely any customizations and the account is also a delivered entity, I know that I won't need the required components here because anywhere that I import this in will likely have it anyways. So I'm just going to hit no and then OK. So now I have the account in my solution. I expand entities here. This is the account that I just put in. And from here I can start modifying the forms, the views, and the fields. First I'm going to go over some form customizations. I'm going to start with the delivered information form. So I double click that. In general, making changes is pretty self-explanatory. The main thing is getting used to the interface and figuring out where everything is. So one of the things that you might be doing is changing the layout of the form. This is very simple to do. You simply click and drag things around and just place them wherever you want them to go. The red line denotes where the item will end up, in which case right now it would end up underneath other phone, or now it would end up underneath main phone, and it shifts everything else around accordingly. The same thing can be done for sections, so I can move the address section up above the account information if you want that to be kind of the first thing people see. Similarly, the same can be done with tabs as well, this entire general tab. The headings for each tab is also displayed on the left side here, where you can click on for easy access. Similarly, the users would also see these headings and they can use it to navigate the form faster. To create a new section or tab, come up here to Insert, and then you can click on any of these to create a new section, or any of these to create a new tab. Regardless of how many columns you pick for either of these, you can always reconfigure these later on. Now typically you can get to the related items of the entity by clicking on any of the values over here. But if for whatever reason you want it also to show up on the form to make it easier to access, then you would insert that as a subgrid. Let's add in a random subgrid at the end of the address section. So I'm going to click on Street 3 here so that when I add the subgrid it's going to be at the very end. Here I'll give it a random name. Now here you can select related records or all record types. If you select all record types, you can select any arbitrary entity in the system and then pick whatever view is available. So by doing this, in this particular example, for every time I go on the account page, I can have a subgrid that shows every connection in the system. It's not overly useful, so this is not commonly used. The more commonly used case is the related records. The limitation here is that you can only add items in that are in a 1-to-N relationship. So for example, you can show all the faxes that have this account as a regarding item. Here you can select the view that's associated with the faxes. Now keep in mind that because you're pulling related records, first of all, the data that can be pulled is already filtered in that you only get faxes relating to the account in question. This is further filtering it based on these system-defined views with whatever criteria they have. So if I choose my faxes, then when you look at an account, you're only going to see faxes tied to that account and also have you set as the owner. Now you just click OK, and you have your subgrid available and you can move around like any other item. Now let's say I want to change the label of the city field here. There's two places that you can do that. I'm going to backtrack here. So I'm going to go back to the fields on the account. Here I can see the city one, double click on that, and you get the entity field definition. Here I'm going to change this to city name. Save and close. Then I come up to account, and I want to publish just the account entity. This will publish any changes you've made to any of the account items. Now I go back to forms, open the information form, and we can see that the city display has been changed. Just now the change that was done was to the field definition of the entity. This updates the field as it displays anywhere else it is used. Let's say I change it on the form instead. This is changing the field name on the form level. Because I've specified the label here, it will override the default display name from the field definition. So depending on your use case, you may want to modify the field definition display name or just the display name on the form itself. Now let's say I want to create a new field. Just click on this button down here. Call this alternate city for no reason. When you tab out of this or select out of it, it's going to automatically create the name based on your display name without spaces. Note that when you're creating a field, this is the only time you can determine what kind of data type it is. When you're modifying existing fields, you can't change what type they are. So if you define something as an option set, you can't change it into two options later. For the city, we'll want a text field. So I'll pick single line of text, and then save and close. To make things easier, I'll select custom fields here, and we can see the field we've just created. And then we can stick that on like any other field. Now, just like how I published the account entity to get those field definition changes, I'll also have to save and then publish the form itself so that these changes are reflected to the user. So now we're done with the forms. If you want to create a new form, it's very simple. Just go to New. You probably want to be making a main form, and it comes up with a very basic template that you can expand on. The mobile forms are just a listing of all the fields that you want to see in the mobile view. So if you're accessing CRM from your cell phone, this is what you would see. There's no layouts when you're looking on the mobile forms. It's simply a list of all the fields that you want in whatever order you specify. For any of these forms, you can assign specific security roles. So perhaps you may want different forms for different users based on whether they're a sales user or a marketing user. Configuring this is pretty self-explanatory. Now let's move on to view customization. We're going to look at the active accounts view. Now the two main things I'm going to go over are the filter criteria and the columns. First of all, the columns. Very simple. If you want to add any column to the view from the account, you simply select from this list. Also, for any entities that have a one-to-one relationship with the account, you can also pick fields from those entities as well. So for example, let's say I want to see some details of each person that owns the account. So I'll go to the owning user. Now let's say I want to see where the account owners live, if I want to track whether or not there's a correlation between user location and the accounts they typically manage. So I simply go address one country and address one city. Now of course this will only work if your users have their address data populated on their user records. Click OK. The fields will be at the very end, and you can shift them around with the arrow keys like so. If you want to change the size of this, you simply go to Change Properties, and you can modify the field width by pixels. Now let's look at the filter criteria. The filter criteria determine what records are actually pulled into the view. So click here. And as we can see, the only criteria for an active account is that the status is equal to active. Now to add more conditions is very simple. Simply select a field from the account. You can change the comparison type. And depending on the comparison type, there may be a third section to put in more data. So if you want the country to begin with a certain text, you're going to have to specify what that text is. You can also specify filter criteria for records relating to the account. In order to do that, first notice here where it says fields. These are all the fields relating to the account. If you scroll down slowly, you'll eventually see a related section. These are all the entities that are related to the account. Since we want to look at the user address data, it might make some sense to filter on the users as well. So we're going to go down here and select owning user. Now let's say in addition to looking at active accounts, we also want to make sure that the accounts belong to users that have access to the system. So here we're going to go to Fields, go down to Status, and select Enabled Users. Now this view will pull in accounts that are tied to users which are active in the system. Also notice that the criteria now is indented. This indicates that all this criteria belongs to the owning user record that is related to the account and not to the account itself. Not only can you add more criteria for entities that are related to the account, you can also add in criteria for entities that are related to the user. You can chain this as many times as you want. You'll also notice a group AND and group OR buttons up here. You can use this to logically group sets of criteria. So as an example, first I'll throw in some arbitrary criteria. Now if you ever forget how to use these buttons, simply click on them and it'll tell you how to use them. Now before we start grouping these, it's unlikely that account name is going to contain corp and industry in it. So we want to group these in an OR. So we do select row here, click on the button, and that's it. So here I'm telling it to pick up accounts that are both active, and also the account name contains either corp or industry in the name. You can basically group as many things as you want, so I can select this first clause, and select this entire group here, and then group it as an AND. This is unnecessary because technically that's what it's already doing. But depending on what your criteria is, you may want to do something similar to this. For those who want to be more proficient in this kind of logic, you'll want to look up something called Boolean algebra. One thing to note is that defining criteria this way is also used on the advanced finds. That's pretty much it for the views. So we're just going to click OK, save and close. And if you want the changes to view to be reflected in the system, simply go again to the account and then publish the entity.